43 countries, one summit, and a handshake in Tehran that just redrew every assumption Washington held about containing Iran. The partnership announced between Iran and Russia on February 17th wasn't a treaty. It was a declaration that the era of American economic coercion just hit a hard ceiling. And the cost to maintain that ceiling is about to bankrupt the strategy that's guided U.S. foreign policy for 3 decades. Here's what this means for your world. Every time the Federal Reserve raises interest rates to combat inflation, part of what they're fighting is the structural realignment happening in energy markets right now. When Iran and Russia coordinate oil production outside dollar-denominated trade, they create pricing pressure that shows up in American grocery stores, at gas pumps, and in the interest rates on mortgages. The bill for trying to isolate these two economies is being passed directly to you, and it's about to get significantly more expensive. This channel runs on no corporate funding, no government backing, and no advertising pressure telling us what to leave out. The analysis you're about to hear regarding what Professor Mohammad Marandi revealed about this partnership is not happening on mainstream platforms. It's happening here. If this kind of framework matters to you, the kind that connects dots before the evening news catches up, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. You'll want to be here for what comes next. Let me show you exactly what happened. On February 17th, Iranian and Russian officials formalized what experts are calling a comprehensive strategic partnership. The document itself spans 47 pages. It covers military cooperation, intelligence sharing, energy coordination, technology transfer, and perhaps most significantly, payment systems that bypass the dollar entirely. Professor Mohammad Marandi, a political analyst at the University of Tehran who has advised on Iranian foreign policy, described this as the most consequential realignment in the region since the Soviet collapse, not because it creates new capabilities, because it removes the constraints that previously limited how those capabilities could be deployed. The official Western narrative describes this as two isolated regimes forming an alliance of convenience, temporary, transactional, built on desperation rather than strategic vision. The operational reality shows something fundamentally different. Both countries possess what the other needs. Russia has advanced military technology and diplomatic cover at the United Nations. Iran has regional influence, proven drone and missile production capacity, and geographic positioning that controls critical energy choke points. When you combine these assets under coordinated planning, you don't get addition. You get multiplication of strategic effect. Here's the technical dimension that changes calculations across the Pentagon. Iran's drone manufacturing capacity currently produces approximately 6,000 units annually. The Shahed 136, which Russia has deployed extensively in Ukraine, costs between $20,000 and $50,000 to manufacture. Compare this to the American Patriot Interceptor missile system. Each missile costs $4 million. Each launcher system costs $400 million. The United States cannot produce interceptors fast enough to match the production rate of threats these drones represent. Not even close. And now Russia gains access to Iranian production facilities, Iranian supply chains, and Iranian technical expertise in building precisely the asymmetric weapons that are most difficult for Western defense systems to counter cost-effectively. The mathematics extends beyond drones. Iran produces approximately 100 ballistic missiles per month at various ranges and payload capacities. The United States produces roughly 6 interceptors per month for its ground-based mid-course defense system. 100 versus 6? Read that again slowly. Even if American interception technology worked perfectly in every scenario, which it demonstrably does not, the production asymmetry makes sustained defense economically impossible. Iran now shares this production methodology with Russia. Russia now provides Iran with satellite intelligence, electronic warfare capabilities, and advanced air defense systems. The capability multiplication moves in both directions. Now here's what the Pentagon is not discussing publicly. This partnership provides Russia with access to the Persian Gulf and Iran with access to Central Asia simultaneously. Every military planner understands that logistics determines outcomes more than weapons technology. The Trans-Caspian corridor that Iran and Russia now coordinate gives both countries the ability to move goods, weapons, and resources through a route that Western sanctions cannot touch. It's not theoretical. It's operational right now. And it's processing volume that's growing month by month. Let me show you the number that explains this entire shift better than any diplomatic statement. Bilateral trade between Iran and Russia increased from $4 billion in 2021 to approximately $11 billion in 2024. That's a 175% increase in 3 years. But the absolute number is less important than what's being traded and how. Energy equipment, military technology, nuclear cooperation, industrial machinery. And crucially, almost none of it settled in dollars. The transactions occur in rubles, rials, and increasingly in gold-backed instruments that bypass the SWIFT financial messaging system entirely. Every dollar of that trade represents a transaction that used to require Western financial infrastructure. Now it doesn't. The strategic partnership includes specific provisions for military technical cooperation. Russia provides Iran with Su-35 fighter aircraft, advanced radar system, satellite technology. In exchange, Iran provides Russia with drone manufacturing expertise, ballistic missile technology, and according to intelligence assessments, ammunition production capacity that helps sustain Russian operations. The value exchange is not measured in dollars. It's measured in capabilities that both countries could not acquire through Western markets under any circumstances. Sanctions didn't prevent this partnership. Sanctions created the necessity that made it inevitable. Here's the dimension almost nobody is discussing openly. This partnership gives both countries the ability to coordinate responses to Western pressure rather than absorbing it independently. When the United States imposes sanctions on Iran, Russia can provide economic relief through energy purchases and technology transfers. When the United States imposes sanctions on Russia, Iran can provide military technology and regional diplomatic support. The isolation strategy that worked when targets were genuinely isolated stops working when the isolated parties form coordinated resistance, and the cost of maintaining pressure increases exponentially. Watch what happened in the 6 months after this partnership was formalized. Iran's oil exports, which the United States claimed were suppressed to near zero through sanctions, reached approximately 1.5 million barrels per day by August 2024. Who was buying? China primarily, but also customers paying through Russian intermediaries and banking systems. The sanctions enforcement that previously kept Iranian oil off markets doesn't function when buyers have alternative payment systems and diplomatic cover from a UN Security Council member. Russia provides exactly that cover. And in exchange, Russia gains access to oil supplies that stabilize its own energy export strategies. The math section reveals why this partnership is not just difficult for Washington to counter, it's economically unsustainable to try. The United States currently spends approximately $850 billion annually on defense. That's more than the next 10 countries combined. Russia's defense budget is roughly $85 billion. Iran's is approximately $25 billion. Combined, they spend $110 billion, about 13% of what America spends. Yet, through this partnership, they're creating strategic problems that force the United States to deploy resources across multiple theaters simultaneously. The cost asymmetry is brutal. $1 spent on Iranian drone production forces the United States to spend $200 on interception capability. $1 spent on Russian electronic warfare development forces the United States to spend $500 on countermeasures and hardening. The defender cannot win this equation indefinitely. Let me be very specific about what that means in fiscal reality. The United States Navy operates approximately 470 ships. Maintaining just one carrier strike group requires roughly 30 ships and costs approximately $5 million per day to operate. $5 million per day just to keep one group at sea. The United States currently maintains 11 carrier strike groups. That's over $70 million per day in operational costs before any combat operations begin. Iran and Russia don't need to match this capability. They need to make it too expensive to sustain. And they're succeeding. Every Houthi drone launched in the Red Sea, supported by Iranian technology and intelligence, forces American destroyers to expend interceptor missiles that cost exponentially more than the threats they're designed to stop. The economic attrition is measurable, and it's accelerating. The replacement asymmetry compounds the problem. When Iran loses a drone facility to an airstrike, it rebuilds the production line within weeks using decentralized manufacturing methods. The technology required is not particularly sophisticated. The components are commercially available. The workforce is trained. Total reconstruction cost for a medium-scale facility, approximately $5 million. When the United States loses an F-35 fighter, and it has lost several this year alone to various causes, replacement is not straightforward. The F-35 production line currently delivers roughly 156 aircraft per year at a cost of $80 million per unit. If combat losses or operational accidents exceed production rate, the fleet shrinks, and the production infrastructure cannot be rapidly scaled. It took 20 years and over $400 billion just to develop the program. That's not a resource pool you can tap quickly to surge production. Now pull back to understand how this fits into the larger strategic chessboard. China is watching this partnership with intense interest. Beijing's own challenge with Washington centers on Taiwan and the Western Pacific. But every carrier group the United States deploys to the Middle East to manage threats emerging from the Iran-Russia partnership is a carrier group that cannot simultaneously be positioned near Taiwan. American strategic attention is finite. American naval assets are finite. China gains passively from this partnership without contributing a single weapon or dollar directly. The more resources Washington commits to managing Middle East contingencies, the wider the window becomes for Chinese action in its own priority theater. Russia benefits in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Every month that American focus remains on Iran is a month where pressure on Ukraine operations receives less Western attention. Every interceptor missile the United States fires at an Iranian-designed drone in the Middle East is one less interceptor available for European defense stockpiles. Russia's strategic calculation is straightforward. The partnership with Iran creates problems for the United States that are expensive, sustained, and distributed across multiple regions. Moscow doesn't need to defeat American power directly. It needs to make the cost of projecting that power so expensive that Washington eventually withdraws from positions it can no longer afford to maintain. The Global South is drawing conclusions from this partnership that will shape diplomatic alignments for the next decade. The message transmitting to governments across Asia, Africa, and Latin America is not subtle. Two countries that the United States has subjected to the most comprehensive sanctions regimes in modern history are not just surviving, they're coordinating, they're building alternative systems. They're demonstrating that American economic coercion has limits. And when you reach those limits, alternatives exist. Saudi Arabia is negotiating with Iran. The UAE is maintaining trade relationships with Russia despite Western pressure. Turkey is balancing between NATO membership and economic cooperation with both countries. The diplomatic realignment is not theoretical, it's operational. Here's the energy dimension that connects directly to American households. Russia is the world's third largest oil producer. Iran has the fourth largest proven oil reserves globally. Together, they represent roughly 15% of global production capacity and 20% of proven reserves. When these two coordinate production levels, export strategies, and pricing mechanisms outside the traditional Western-dominated market structures, they create price volatility that the United States cannot fully control through strategic petroleum reserves or diplomatic pressure on OPEC. The price at your gas pump is partly determined by a partnership that was formalized in Tehran 6 months ago, and that influence is growing. The technology transfer component of this partnership may be the most consequential long-term factor. Iran has developed expertise in certain missile technologies, drone systems, and electronic warfare capabilities through decades of operating under sanctions. That expertise required innovation specifically because Western technology was unavailable. Russia has advanced satellite systems, nuclear technology, and aerospace engineering capabilities. When you allow these knowledge bases to merge, you accelerate capability development in both directions. Iran gains access to Russian satellite intelligence that makes its targeting more precise. Russia gains access to Iranian manufacturing methods that make its drone production more cost-effective. The technology exchange creates a capability ratchet that moves in only one direction, forward. Professor Marandi has described this partnership as representing a fundamental shift from a unipolar world order to a multipolar one, not because of ideology, because of mathematics and geography. The United States cannot simultaneously pressure Iran, contain Russia, compete with China, maintain European security commitments, and manage Pacific defense postures without eventually overextending. Something has to give, and the Iran-Russia partnership is specifically designed to increase the pressure on that overextension until the breaking point becomes visible. The nuclear dimension adds another layer of complexity. Russia is helping Iran with civilian nuclear technology under agreements that comply with international law but make Western intelligence agencies deeply uncomfortable. The technical expertise that Russia provides for civilian reactors is not dramatically different from the expertise required for weapons programs. Iran maintains that its nuclear program is entirely peaceful. Western intelligence agencies assess otherwise. But regardless of intent, the Russian technical assistance makes Iranian nuclear capabilities, whether civilian or military, more sophisticated and more difficult to disrupt through sabotage or airstrikes. The facilities are hardened with Russian expertise. The supply chains are diversified through Russian intermediaries. The diplomatic protection at the UN comes from a veto-wielding Security Council member. Let me show you where this leads within specific timeframes. 3 predictions with clocks attached. First prediction, within 6 months, we will see formal announcement of a joint Iran-Russia-China naval exercise in the Indian Ocean. Not a small symbolic event, a substantive demonstration of coordinated military capability that directly challenges American naval dominance in a region that controls 40% of global oil trade. The planning is already underway. The diplomatic groundwork is being laid. Watch for the announcement before summer 2025. Second prediction, within 1 year, at least 3 additional countries will join alternative payment systems that Iran and Russia have established outside the dollar framework. The candidates are obvious. Venezuela, which is already heavily sanctioned. Belarus, which is essentially integrated into Russian economic structures. And one of either Pakistan, Turkey, or a Central Asian republic. The economic gravity pulling countries toward dollar alternatives is measurable, and it's intensifying. Third prediction, within 18 months, a major regional power, most likely Saudi Arabia, will establish formal diplomatic and economic cooperation agreements with both Iran and Russia simultaneously despite American objections. The Abraham Accords framework that was supposed to isolate Iran regionally is collapsing. The China-brokered Iran-Saudi normalization in 2023 was just the beginning. The follow-on agreements will be more comprehensive, and they will include Russia. The Middle East order that Washington designed is being replaced by arrangements Washington doesn't control. What burned into concrete in Tehran 6 months ago is not just a bilateral partnership. It's proof that the unipolar moment is structurally over, not because American power disappeared, because the cost of wielding that power everywhere simultaneously has become economically prohibitive. And the adversaries have figured out that coordinated resistance is far more effective than isolated defiance. Here's what to watch for in the next 90 days specifically. Joint military production announcements, expansion of the north-south transport corridor that runs through Iran and Russia, additional countries quietly joining alternative payment mechanisms, energy coordination that affects global oil prices, and most importantly, any movement on Russian advanced weapon sales to Iran that were previously restricted. If S-400 air defense systems start appearing in Iranian territory in operational deployments, not just token deliveries, that represents a threshold crossing. Russia providing Iran with advanced air defense makes any future Western military option against Iranian nuclear facilities exponentially more difficult and costly. The strategic landscape 6 months ago assumed that sustained pressure would eventually force Iran to negotiate from weakness and Russia to accept Western terms for ending Ukraine operations. That assumption is now demonstrably incorrect. The partnership announced in Tehran is designed specifically to ensure that neither country ever reaches that negotiating position. And the early evidence suggests the strategy is working. Drop your prediction in the comments. Which happens first? A three-nation naval exercise in the Indian Ocean, Saudi Arabia formalizing cooperation with both Iran and Russia, or a major dollar alternative announcement involving 5 or more countries? Tell me, because I read every single one, and the pattern you're seeing matters. If this analysis gave you a framework that mainstream coverage doesn't provide, the kind that connects economic policy to gas prices to strategic partnerships forming in Tehran, share it with one person who needs to understand how the global order is actually shifting, not the version in State Department briefings. The version that's happening in bilateral agreements and alternative payment systems. The next video examines the capability that both Iran and Russia are developing that changes deterrence calculations across the Pacific. Subscribe so you're there when it lands. The framework we've built here is just the beginning.